Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leathertainment Studio Podcast. This is your host, Tony Leatherstein. Today, we're going to talk about something slightly different. We are reviewing brands. We're talking about leather industry, but we're going to approach the subject from a hobby or craftsmanship standpoint, especially if you have interest towards leather, you want to learn more and maybe do something with leather, take on the hobby of leather crafting. You might find value in this episode where we have Marianne here. She didn't know anything about leather 6 years ago, but she's a skillful artisan today with all the efforts she did by herself, starting from absolute scratch. And we would like to talk about that journey, learning leather craft, do's, don't do's, and some helpful tips for ones who might be looking into this craft as a hobby or side hustle. So, Marianne, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Would you like to start introducing by yourself and with that journey a little bit, how it started and what are you doing with leather now?
Yeah, thanks, Tanner, for having me. Well, I was always an artist of some sort, from drawing to painting to writing to knitting to woodworking, and I had intended on. Uh, so basically, if I saw something that I thought was beautiful, I always had a natural curiosity in how to make it. And several years ago, someone had invited me to a Facebook group where people were taking apart junk luxury bags. So, like Louis Vuitton, for instance, and harvesting the canvas to make other things. They were also painting on them. And there were only a few people at the time doing this. And so, since I had painted with using acrylics before, I thought, well, let me just try to do this just for fun. So I started by purchasing an authentic junk bag, and took it apart. And as I created items, I would post them, and people would say, "Hey, that's really cool. Can you make one for me as well?" So that's how it all started. And then making one turned into making uh, you know, I grow from making something very simple to then making planners. I became well known in the custom planner making world, which is a whole secret society in itself because people take their planners and agenda holders very, very seriously, which is it was just kind of fun and neurotic and fulfilling to my neurosis and personality. So that all, kind of started. And when the lockdowns happened in 2020, I thought to really create an outlet for people to have something creative to do. At the same time, a lot of people were commenting things such as, "You're so talented, you're so talented." And I wanted to prove to people that I wasn't born using pricking irons or sewing or edging. I learned, and just like I learned, everybody else could learn as well. So it isn't something special to me. It's something that could be taught because it's a skill. And so I started teaching classes in 2020. Uh, the cool thing is that I have students that are like a former attorney and also a former doctor that had told me, they have no creative ability at all. And now they refurbish vintage bags, and they're better consumers for it as well because they know what to look for. The one thing that I do guarantee is after you learn more about leather crafting, you'll never ever look at a bag the same way again, which is a blessing and a curse. Because you may look at your luxury closet and wonder why you spent what you did on a certain item, but it also makes you a smarter consumer. So I ask people before taking one of my very basic classes, like, do you really want to know what's behind the curtain of a magic show? Because the
Goes
illusion
away.
and the fantasy, it goes
Yeah.
away.
You
Yeah, it goes away.
realize
You'll never look at it.
that thousands of dollars is a lot about marketing, not about what's behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's really fascinating because of the psychology behind that, which you go into in many of your very valuable podcasts. So those were always fun to listen to and understand human behavior and why people buy certain things. So anyway, that's how I got started. Um, and yeah,
So
so
that's
so it's been really fun, and it's also it's also a great means to create a little bit of money on the sometimes a lot of money on the side. It's also a nice balance if your day job is a very serious job. Let's say you're in the medical industry or the banking industry, or something that, or IT, something. Well, IT could be creative, but something that maybe is not as creative day to day. It's a nice thing to express your creative ability, and leather craftsmanship is a great way to do that.
I think so. It's basically a great story to dig on a lot of different aspects you mentioned from your journey. Um, One thing was the COVID times. A lot of people stuck at home, didn't know what to do. We actually lost a lot of ways we just get rid of steam and stress. So, what do you do at home? And many people started to look for hobbies, and leatherwork was one, woodworking is another one. But I think leatherwork is more suitable for like home-based stuff a lot more than woodwork, less dust, it's less machinery and all that
Mm.
stuff. You can do a lot more with leather in a smaller space with smaller tools or budgets, and it's less dangerous. So I think leather is a great choice, but there's a lot more resources to get into woodwork, but there wasn't that much to get into leather craft at that point. So it's great that you started a class after you learned a few years um, to help some people, especially like those people who has the day jobs as lawyers or bankers. I think the need comes from that, we're looking at these screens all day now with most of our jobs, and we kind of crave that doing things with our hands, and leather satisfies that urge. And I know a lot of people has this urge. That's why there's a growing interest towards these hobbies, and probably it's going to be helpful to some people learning your journey and where to go about it. So that's a great story you started. But one thing caught my attention, that you started with canvas, and canvas is not leather. It's similar, but it's an alternative. How did you switch to leather? Why? And that part, how that part happened?
Well, first, just the influence of being in this particular group where people were upcycling particular canvas. But then I just assumed that it was less expensive to go to Joann's Fabrics and buy pleather. Again, this is pure ignorance. And then when I discovered the main vendor I buy my leather from in Napa, California, because I live very close, I realized that actually purchasing just an entire hide was not more expensive at all than buying some of the pleather that like a Joann's Fabrics has. So I also, as people were asking me to make them different things, instead of buying a different color hide in so many different colors, I got into stains and dyes and paints. You could just buy vegetable tanned leather. And instead of having this array of colors, which is not practical for just a small little artisan, just buy one or two different thicknesses of hides and veg tan leather and dye them or stain them or paint them or airbrush them. So, so that's how I made the switch. I love the feel of it. I love the specialness of it. I love the fact that you're contributing to good things in the environment. So I think a huge misconception. So, hopefully there's some vegan protesters listening to this, is that, no cow or calf or lamb or goat has been slaughtered because of their skins. In fact, like you said, utilizing those skins does so much for eliminating that waste that would build up and create so much byproduct of bacteria and all the things that come from just wastage in our land. So utilizing leather, with that assumption that people are not going to stop eating meat, is one of the things that people can do to contribute to eliminating waste that's already being
Right.
created, as opposed to non-leather products with, making something that, and all the byproducts of doing that. So that was another reason that I wanted to do more leather versus, just working on somebody else's trademark label and just upcycling. That kind of got very boring for me. Because it wasn't just about creating an item to sell and make a little money from. It was truly that creative expression about creating something that may not exist that I had been looking for, like the perfect bag or the perfect backpack, or something to carry XYZ thing that I've never been able to find. And has anyone thought of this? And so and leather was ultimately the way that the product that I wanted to use to make those things. Also, when I embarked on this particular warehouse in Napa, California, uh, they have some of the most beautiful leathers, and being close by, I'm able to just walk in and touch and feel, and so many different bison. Recent hide I bought was bison, and it just is very, very cool, and they're great to work with. And so sometimes it's, chicken or the egg, what comes first. Sometimes I find the leather
Yeah.
because it's so beautiful, and then I say, okay, what can I make from it, as opposed to, I want to make this, what kind of leather should I get? So they kind of go hand in
Right.
hand.
I think I know which warehouse you're talking about. I was in California visiting my brother-in-law, and I searched for leather suppliers. I found just a few in California, in San Francisco, and one was in the Napa area. I drove there, big warehouse with lots of different leathers, variations. They've been shipping out online orders, a small team. Um, and I don't think there's multiple in the area, so probably
Those are my
yeah,
guys, yeah, and they're so
yeah, I forgot the company
and
name, but it was a beautiful selection of leathers from all around the world. It was one of the first exciting places I ran into in the US. And this was prior to I started Pegai. It was 2016 or something. So I was very happy to run into that business. And as you said, there's so many different types of leather. It's beautiful in different ways, thick, thin, soft, stiff. It gives you that creative thinking of, oh, I can make this using this leather, I can make that using this leather. it it shows you how versatile this fabric is. You can make a scarf, you can make a shoe sole out of it, so it's just up to your imagination and finding the right material for it.
yeah, and the name of the that warehouse is Hide House.
Okay, it still doesn't ring a bell. It was a long time ago, but I'm sure I it was the
Yeah.
same place. I've been there.
Yeah, so it's the only one really in Napa. So one of the cool things that they do is they, if there is a luxury house, and they're going through quality control and looking through their hides, sometimes Hide House buys their throwaway leathers because it may have like one little blemish or one scar, because cows or goats or any animal, just like people, don't have these perfect skins. They're not sitting there in a spa and getting feathered and fed grapes, So sometimes there's blemishes on these hides. And so sometimes they have these one-off hides. And so I'm like, I go in and I'm like, all right, where's the one-off bin? And I recognize some of these leathers and some of the luxury places that I think that they've come from, because of the color and the texture. And I'm like, I think I know whose scrap this may have been. So it's definitely a benefit of living close by a place like that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great, great story. So, in terms of learning, how did you learn? Did you get a teacher, a master, like in-person class, or did you do all by self-taught, YouTube watching style? And what would you recommend to a completely new person to the leather crafting in terms of learning this?
So definitely find someone to learn from. And there's a lot of us that teach via like live or video tutorials. And there's also many Facebook groups dedicated to leather crafting for various skills. YouTube University, obviously. And your choice depends on your patience and your method of learning. So, for example, the benefit of an interactive class is being able to ask your instructor questions. If you get stuck, pause. That instructor would pause and then help you through navigate through something. The benefit of a video tutorial would be going at your own pace, and again, pausing, at your own pace, doing it at your own time. Um, Regardless which direction you take, um, the one thing no class could substitute for is practice. So just like anything else, music, if you're trying to learn how to play guitar, nothing, the very best guitarists in the world could be your master, and nothing substitutes
Practice.
you taking the time to practice at home. So how I learned, but I don't recommend this, is just kind of winging it and figuring it out by myself. And the reason that I say I don't recommend this, and it's funny, I drew a little diagram if in case you ask me that question. So in my opinion, there's two learning curves.
Okay.
Okay. And A is starting and B is finishing.
Okay.
You'll get to B.
Right.
But if you have an instructor, you're just going to get there a lot smoother and a lot faster.
Right.
So this was my learning curve.
Right.
So, it depends. Maybe my ego, got a little bit, maybe when I started, there really weren't very many people teaching at all. And so I just kind of figured it out. Also, like with tools that we're going to get into, like in my opinion, what the top 10 tools would be to get started. There's a reason why there's a tool for everything. And so, I didn't want to put forth a huge investment in the tools that I was using, because I didn't know if this is something that I was going to truly enjoy and continue on. So I didn't want to take up space and spend money on a bunch of tools that inevitably I never used again. So I thought, I'd be resourceful. Well, there's a reason there's a tool and a specific tool for certain things. So as an example, this is my rubber mallet that was given to me by someone. I bartered services. I helped her. She was a senior citizen, and I helped her create like a social media account and doing all these things and getting her set up on Instagram and Facebook and all that. And when she found out what I was using as my rubber mallet, she almost fell over and fainted. And it's because I was using a meat tenderizer, because that's what I had in my house, right, which is just ridiculous. And so will that accomplish what you need to do? I suppose. But I also was wondering why I was getting tennis elbow and my elbow hurt so much. Right. And so when you use the right tool and not your husband's, meat tenderizer, you probably will end up with a lot less problems. So there are good tools to use, and learning from someone who's driven this road or walked this road will prevent you from spending more money in the long run and taking a lot longer, right, to go from point A to point B.
I think so. You're so great that you prepared the diagram and stuff like that, and it's so true that you will definitely get there. It's going to take longer, probably cost more too, if you want to learn by yourself. And that could be just fine depending on what you want to do. If it's a hobby and you don't care, that's great. It's a fun way to learn. You do a lot of things, it doesn't work, fail, and waste time, waste money. It's fine. It's all learning. But if you are impatient, you are a little bit more of a perfectionist, regardless it's a hobby or you want to make money with it, you might want to go quicker, then probably having a tutor online or in person is gonna cut you down on time and expenditure, I think, in the long run. Absolutely greatly illustrated. And on the tools, I can definitely attest to that. I am not like you. I am actually, uh, when I'm trying to learn something, I go like, oh, I see this tool, I need to buy that too. I see this tool, I need to buy that too, before knowing what that tool does exactly, or do I really need it or not. So I end up spending a lot of money that I don't need to. Then I learn, I'm like, you know what, that I probably shouldn't have bought this. Like I'm not going to use it forever. So having a person guiding you through those things will probably prevent you spending some money and some hurt finding, choosing the right tools in the long run. I want to get next as like the end goal or aim of getting into leathercraft. Some people might do it just for fun, do something for themselves, killing the time doing with your hands, have your own products made and understand leather, learn leather, or for family members, right? Just not to make any money. It's just a hobby. But some people may get into it for making money as a side hustle, additional income, whatever you call it, which is perfectly fine. And I think leather is a very profitable business, regardless of which part of it you are in. Uh, it will make you good money as long as you learn it and do it efficiently. So how do you decide, or if you decide to make some income with leather, um, how can you make money with leather? Like as a hobbyist, you learn some stuff. How do you make that transition to generate some income?
So if you are uber humble and don't like promoting yourself, it's probably not going to happen because no one knows you exist unless you do put yourself out there. So, and the way to put yourself out there is social media. I mean, this is how it is these days. So, um, how you came to be so well known with your YouTube channel. But again, different groups that you join that specialize only in that. There are members that are in that group for that reason because they're interested in that topic. I haven't delved into like the Reddit or the Twitch or there's another one that I can't remember. But I mainly Facebook, Instagram.
Mhm.
In fact, I use Instagram as my portfolio. So if someone wants to see my work, I say, here's my Instagram. I was very late to the Instagram game. My friends who knew I was an artist forever and ever told me years before, you need to be on Instagram. You need to be on. And I said, no, no, no. I have LinkedIn for professional and I have Facebook for personal. I don't need any more. And if you are any sort of artist, in my opinion, you have to be on Instagram. Also, in my opinion, I don't think you can go from zero to now I'm doing this as a business. I think you need to practice enough to become credible.
Right.
Because there's definitely an artistry to conditioning, a technique, in terms of like refurbishing someone's bag. Because there's a lot of people that send me very expensive bags, like Chanel bags. And, if you've been doing this for 3 months, are you sure or are comfortable enough that you could take on some, there's a lot of liability if you don't know what you're doing. Is that few $100s you're going to make from cleaning someone's bag worth it if you risk ruining it? So if someone did want to do this, start off small, start off doing, very small leather goods, and learn and really immerse yourself and treat it more as a hobby so you don't put that financial pressure on yourself. Treat it as a hobby, really fall in love with it, determine if you are in love with it, and then just post some things. And people will start paying attention. Oh, that's really cool. I wouldn't mind having something like that. Hey, can you make that for me? If so, how much would that cost? And I think that kind of conversation just comes up organically. But to be a master in anything is hours and hours of practice. To be a master, insert any profession. You don't go, if you're in corporate America, you didn't take one class at a university and then now you're an executive. So things take time. But if you're truly interested, it's inevitable that will happen.
Right.
But you got to post, because if you don't post stuff out there, nobody knows you exist. So you kind of have to remember, I'm not trying to, and people have to remember too, you're not showing off. You're just letting people know that you exist and these are your capabilities. And that's okay to put yourself out there. And there's a lot of people out there that may be in need of your service. And the only way they know that you exist is by existing on social media.
Absolutely. Definitely well said. It's gonna take time, you're not gonna become a millionaire and making hundreds of thousands of dollars from your leather crafting right away. And probably it helps if you pick something in terms of how you're going to make money from leather, and then keep your practice and build your mastery, which could be many different ways. It could be repairing some old purses, it could be
Mhm.
repurposing, buying vintage stuff, it could be designing your own goods, hand sewing, hand stitching, custom work leather. You could be building home decor using leather with your creativity, right? Like it's so versatile. There is absolutely many different ways you can produce value with leather. Um, and as you get into leather, you listening to your feelings and the things you ran into. I was like, oh, I can actually do some carving and um, carving work with leather on vegetable tan leather and hand painting. That's one way of creativity, but repairs is another and requires completely different skill sets. Once you get into one, try some, and you like it, you start building your practice. Probably your first circle, even if you're not on the social media, will signal you like, okay, this is pretty cool stuff. People pay you for it. And as long as you get that
Mhm.
signal, I think going on social media is the next best thing you should be doing.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say too, um, if you do want to do this professionally and make a good living, and the money is the main motivator opposed to like the art of it, you probably want to focus on doing a few things over and over and over as opposed to one-offs. For example, my art business is a very boutique business where one week I may get a torn up Chanel sent to me, and then the next week someone may be asking for a dog collar that's made out of upcycled canvas. And so the cool thing about that, so the benefit of that is that I never get bored, which is the entire reason that I got into this. However, the disadvantage of that is that you always kind of have to reassess, relearn, so for instance, someone may see a torn up Chanel, and then they think that everything that's torn is salvageable. Well, guess what? Leather is a skin that is dead. You can't stitch it and wait for the cells to regenerate like you do when we get cuts on our skin. So not everything is salvageable. So my point is, sometimes people send me things because they just think that I could, you know, um, turn my magic wand and make it look like a brand new bag, which sometimes I can, but sometimes you can't repair leather; it just has to get replaced. But again, sorry, this belabored response is if you don't specialize in doing a few things and you do them over and over, you're kind of relearning how to do something, or it's everything ends up being a brand new project.
Yeah,
So, if making handles, it's not something I do all the time, but if I did it every day, I'd be a lot faster. So sometimes the things that I make take me a lot longer to do because I do a little of everything as opposed to just three things over and over. So if you're doing this for good income, the efficiency in doing fewer things over and over and over is probably a better business
yeah,
model than than sprinkling a little bit of magic on everything.
absolutely. And sometimes it could be a tricky trap, I would say, for a lot of creatives, because creative people like to take on these new challenges. Oh, that's new. I can do it. Knowing that there's a challenge and learning coming along this new problem, they want to jump on a lot of different things. But again, if you're into make the money, then that will delay your income for a good while. So that's helpful for people who might want to get into leather to make money. Try to learn what you like and focus on it. So you mentioned a couple times Chanel repair. I know one of the things you shared before on your Instagram, the Chanel, the cut Chanel flap bag, I think it was, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I still have it here because the owner is out of the country and she wanted me to hold on to it until she came back so it wouldn't be just sitting at her doorstep.
Yeah,
So I still
I
have
wanna
it.
talk about that, some of the cool repairs, like what kind of crazy things you've seen so far people do with their leather stuff or happened to their leather stuff. And like how do you repair it? Like for example, that one is a good example, and you can share some other interesting ones after that.
Yeah. So this one I call the Chanel from Hell because it really was. So everything I do or everything I've done is by hand. So I use pricking irons and everything's a hand stitch. Well, I have my Chanel customers are always the ones that have the most faith in me. Like they send me these 30, 40-year-old bags, not that this one was. And they, again, they think I just could repair everything. And I appreciate the confidence, but not everything is repairable.
Yeah.
Like if leather is disintegrating, for example, it just needs to get replaced. You can't just refurbish something that is completely torn. So the interesting story behind this caviar was it was torn here and torn here, and then there was a little slit
Yeah,
here.
there's a
And
before
it
and
went,
after images on your Instagram page. I've seen that. That was ridiculous. I want to learn more about like how did you put it back into that shape?
yeah, in fact, I still have the panel that was cut. So, um, something like that cannot be graphed. It just needs to get entirely
Right.
replaced because you can't just, again, leather is a skin, and skin that's alive, like our flesh, gets stitched up and the cells regenerate and you have, new skin. Well, leather is dead skin that's never going to regenerate. So something that's slashed can't just get repaired and look brand new. So this particular bag, the back panel, which is what this was a part of,
Hmm.
is one whole
Yeah, one whole
piece.
piece. Yeah.
So, I told her I could try. So she sent me the bag, and I actually reached out to a very well-known repair because I just didn't know. I didn't think I wanted to take this on. One, it's a machine stitch. So all these are machine stitched. Okay. So although I have a sewing machine, my husband gifted me one 3 years ago. I never ever turned it on because everything I do is hand stitch. And so that was the first challenge. It's a machine stitch. And if I attempt to hand stitch this, it's going to be a
Yeah,
different
it's not gonna
stitch. So
look
it's
the
not going to be
same. Yeah.
right. It's not going to look the same, and I'm going to be 90 years old by the time I'm finished. It's just ridiculous. All right, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
stitching in this back
I don't
panel.
think anybody does that cool
So
thing with hand stitching. That's a machine work. So
yeah, so I had reached out to a well-known repair, and it was interesting because the reply was, because I said, hey, do you want this work? I'm not sure I want to take this on. And their reply was, they gave me a quote. And because I said, it's for my client. And they said, well, that's a hand stitch. Therefore, it's going to be XYZ, dollars. And I was like, wow, you're considered like the gold standard in this luxury. And it's not a hand
yeah.
stitch. I wonder why they said that. So, whatever. So I said, okay, that's fine. So I thought, if I don't figure out how to use my sewing machine and repair this for her, I don't think it's repairable. So I took my machine and I went to Joann's, where my husband purchased this from 3 years ago. They still had it in the system, and there had been a class that day, and one of the people signed up had canceled. And so she's like, if you want to come back, there's an opening, and I'll teach you how to use your machine. So I rushed back home because I happened to be there. And then I grabbed my machine. I went back, and I happened to have caviar leather, small
Mhm.
pieces, and I had foam. And I said, this is basically what I inevitably have to do. So I learned how to use my machine for this application. Um, One of the things I wanted to mention is, there's a benefit to both machine
Yeah.
stitching and there's a benefit to hand stitching. And we could get
Which I
into
want
that
to
if you'd
talk
like.
next. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. So, and we could talk, I'll talk about the machine and the parts and all that, and not needing a specific leather industrial machine to do this. But the caviar leather was thin enough that I was able, so while I was waiting for a larger piece to come in, because I ordered this exact caviar, I practiced. And this Chanel from Hell took me 4 different attempts to make this.
Yeah.
A lot of room for error. On a scale of 1 to 10, this repair is probably like a 100. I do not recommend this for a
Yeah.
beginner. Um, I'm not sure if I would do it
Yeah,
again because there's a
that's
lot.
what I was gonna ask.
Yeah. So right. So my client purchased this ripped. So purchased this ripped from someone for 2,200.
That's
Okay.
unbelievable. Like,
Um.
still way too much money
Yes,
for me. Yeah,
ripped 100%. But she had more confidence in me than I did. And, I give her good prices on fixing stuff because she sends everything to me to fix. And basically, she now has a like brand new bag for about 3,000.
yeah.
So this on the resale market, granted, it's been redone, but I mean, it looks perfect. Um, I think the caviars by Chanel are going for like 8 grand
I don't know, but
used.
yeah, that sounds.
Crazy. But even if she doesn't resell it, I mean, she now has this bag. However, you can look at it both ways. If no one was able to repair it, that's $2,200 down the
Trash. Yeah,
drain. But, there goes my ego in saying, all right, I've got to do this because if I can't do this, I mean, I reached out to the gold standard in the top place and they were like, well, it's a hand stitch. And I'm like, that's not right at all.
maybe to
So,
justify their quote.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
maybe.
Well, that's a great story. Any other like crazy stuff that you've seen people did to their bags or happened to their bags?
Yeah. So one of the things that like drives me nuts is in some of these luxury groups that are specific to the top expensive bags, people will get color transfer on their bag. So for instance, what color transfer, for those who don't know what I'm referring to, is let's say you have a light colored bag and you wear jeans, dark jeans, or you wear a black suit or something that um, may stain your bag. So all of a sudden you have this light colored bag and you wore dark denim pants and you go home and you realize there's like navy blue on it. So something like that. And I see this all the time, people recommending using something like magic eraser, and they are adamant, and there's a lot of people who do that. And let me just say, please do not use magic eraser, which has bleaching components and very abrasive materials, on these very expensive leather
Yeah.
bags. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Like, what do I see people do? I've seen people put their bags in a washing machine. Now, granted, they're canvas, so like the Louis Vuitton Neverfull. Oh, I'm just gonna throw it in the washing machine.
No, even that has a lot of vaqueta on it, which vegetable tan leathers hate water. They don't like water at all. You'll ruin it right away.
Right, right. So the washing machine thing drives me nuts. The magic eraser. There's some cleaner called Awesome that people buy at the dollar store, and they'll recommend using it. Like,
Yeah.
you're spending $3,000 on a bag, but you're buying $1 cleaner from the what?
Yeah.
So I mean, if it's worth it, and that's also how I started too. Many years ago, people were recommending all these things, and I didn't know leather then, and I ruined vegetable tan handles because I was just listening to these random people, and there's a lot of them. So just because you see something or read something on the internet, um,
Yeah, I
I mean, it
I
just
wouldn't recommend just trying to read something off of internet and try to treat your leather or clean your leather, because leather can vary in tannage and finish and a lot of different things, and they require different treatment. And I try to avoid giving any recommendation, any of my videos, like how to maintain, how to clean your leathers. I don't have any of those videos. People ask me all the time, but like it really depends, and I'm not an expert on it either, so I don't want to say anything. There is people who spent entire careers on it. We had a podcast with Handbag Spa in England, and they spent an entire career, lifetime on it, and they have a big business doing all this stuff for people. If you really have an expensive bag and it's ruined, definitely try to reach out to a professional for those kind of things. Don't try the magic razors. It's probably not gonna work.
it's just not worth
Yeah.
it. Yeah, especially if the value of your bag is in the thousands. Why would you think about it? Why would you use a product that costs you $1, a couple dollars, and why risk it?
Yeah, absolutely not worth it. So going back to the machine and hand stitch situation, it's a big um difference in terms of, skill set, the required time and effort going into the hand saddle stitching practice versus machine stitching. I'm not saying one is better or superior to other. Most of the bags today, even in the top luxury houses, are done machine stitching, like Chanel's and Louis Vuitton's. On the other hand, Hermes mostly saddle stitch, some places still machine stitch and stuff like that. A lot of people don't recognize the difference by looking at it. What can you tell about how do you like one or other? How special or better one over the other one is in your experience so far?
So now that I could speak to both because I just learned how to use my machine, there's definitely benefits to both. And if you want to take that leather craftsmanship role seriously, it's a realistic goal to try to learn both. I think that there's less of a learning curve with a hand stitch because
Yeah.
you basically have your rubber mallet, your pricking iron, and your leather. And so, and I tell my students a perfect stitch comes from a perfect punch. So people would always say, wow, your stitches, they're so perfect. My stitches aren't perfect. My punching is perfect because when you put the needle through, it just naturally goes in the direction of that hole. So I think the learning curve is less for that hand stitch. Um, but, but um, the expediency of a machine cannot be
Yeah.
replaced. So you're talking, basically like, are you going to crochet or knit a sweater, or are you going to use the machine? So it's same with leather crafting. I think that nothing replaces a beautiful hand stitch. The sentiment of it, the specialness, the uniqueness. I'm a perfectionist and I love that a machine stitch is perfect, but people love the imperfections of a hand stitch, which I always thought was interesting because they want it. There's a certain pride people take, customers, and this was all hand
Right.
stitched. So because of the love and the time that goes into something. So there's an application for both. um, One of the things that I learned is if you have a sewing machine already that has a good motor, you could sew leather with a leather foot, a leather needle, um, and appropriate machine setting adjustments. So you don't have to go from nothing to spending $1,500 on like the least expensive I've seen for a
Industrial. Yeah.
leather machine. Correct. Correct. So the like for instance, this caviar leather is very very thin. It went through beautifully, but I do use a leather foot. I have a Viking, that's my sewing machine, and then I do use a leather needle. So I didn't go out and spend $1,500 on a machine just to fix one
Right.
bag. Um, so the difference is, oh, and both absolutely will take practice. So don't think that you now have this sewing machine and it's just going to do the work for you, like a guitar. I now have a guitar, it's just going to play for
Yeah.
me. So both take practice. I think there's significantly more room for error on a sewing machine because this one, for example, I can't adjust the speed of the foot. So it goes from like 0 to Ferrari fast. And I mean, I have to do it. I have to press the pedal barefoot because and I can't adjust it. So, once that needle starts going, if it goes too fast and you make your hole, your leather's been punched with
Yeah.
holes and
The whole
there
thing's
goes your
ruined.
project. Um, Correct. As opposed to, hand punching, you have more control of lining up that fork um, to make sure it's in a straight line and perfect and
Yeah.
beautiful. So,
It's absolutely true. From my own experience, I can share some of the uh, things I learned the hard way. When I was starting Pig, that was my first time designing a leather good and making something out of leather, even though I've been making leather in the tannery, 20 years at that point. So I learned that saddle stitching from YouTube, and I'm like, okay, this is not too difficult, easier to start with, a shorter learning curve. I put my stuff on Etsy, and I was like, okay, if anybody buys it, I will sit down and make. At the same time, I'm driving an Uber for a full-time job. So at about like after a month or so, people start buying like three of these on a day. And then I start sitting down, hand cutting it, hand sewing it. Making three card wallets is taking me like 5 hours a day. I'm like, ooh, this is not
Right.
really scalable. I don't think I can keep this up. I'm trying to sell them at $35, the pricing completely wrong and all that stuff. I'm like, okay, I gotta do something else. How to stitch them with machine. Then it's a whole another world. It's harder to learn actually because there is a million types of machines, needles, the threads, the motors, and there's so much more things. And then once you get the machine, how to use it, just controlling the speed, turning the corners, it's another way of learning. But once you learn it, it will scale you. Now I can sit down and make three wallets in 10 minutes. So it's a different thing. There's that sentiment and beauty in the saddle stitch craft. So it's absolutely like special for different reasons, depending on what you want to do with it. And now in January, I'm going to Switzerland to learn from Peter
For
Knit.
Peter's.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a like
Yeah.
in-person class from him. I wanted to meet him in person. He's a good friend online so far, and I want to actually start dabbling with this really custom high-end crocodile bags here for my own learning sake. So next challenge for me is like refining my saddle stitch. So it's I think
Oh, that's
yeah, I think
awesome.
people need to if you're serious about leathercraft, learning both is valuable.
Yeah,
That's
for sure.
that's really cool. And things that you tried in this journey and failed. Anything you might want to share that didn't work?
Um, so okay, so sourcing products, so consumables that you would use. I think that there's a lot of companies that have great products. There's not one company that has the entire line of products. So, for instance, for my edge coat, I like uniters. I don't know if people call it uniters, but I call it uniters. They're my favorite edging. I tried, and I don't want to bash anybody else, but for me, I like how smooth it is. There are other companies that I love, love, love their leather lotion because it's leather lotion and cleaner in one, like Feeblings. But I may only purchase that. There are other companies that have dyes or stains or paints. So, there's a lot of different vendors out there. I have so by failing or tried and not happy, um, just because you love one product from a vendor, it doesn't mean that the entire line of everything they carry will be as superior. So sometimes it's trial and error. But again, if you have a teacher or someone you could study under, you'll eliminate that trial and error as well as cost, as well as time wasted. There was at one point where I think I had 50 different glues in my garage, and now I only buy one glue. So there's always benefit of learning from somebody because that somebody has probably done all that
Yeah.
time wastage and product wastage and all that. Um, Another huge lesson that I've learned, I'm dealing with this now with another Chanel that I'm repairing, that originally this particular client said, can I just send you this bag? And I said, no, I mean, I can't, no, don't send it. She's like, can I just send it? You could just take a look. And so I said, sure. Um, if something is cut, sometimes it just needs for the leather to be
Right.
replaced. And if you are a perfectionist and you're trying to fix or stitch or surgically repair leather for all those same reasons, like I put in a ton of hours into this current Chanel that I'm working on, and I should have just replaced it because it was slashed. There's X's in the front, X's in the front, in the back. So I'm guessing maybe it was like I don't know. I've seen a X before on a Chanel that it was not for resale, so I don't know if that happened, but She had an X and she had been using it, and she's like, "Can I just send it to you?" And I said, "Sure, fine." Um, and it looks okay. I mean, it looks better than it ended up here, but I shouldn't have repaired it. I shouldn't have grafted it. I shouldn't have airbrushed it after and stained and sealed it. I should have just replaced the entire back with new lambskin. Um, so, sometimes you're trying to do the least effective thing because the customer wants to keep the cost down, and it ends up being not perfect. Right. And if you're a perfectionist like I am, I don't, when I create something, I'm not thinking of the amateur looking at my stuff. I think of what's my biggest critic or my biggest competition that wants to poke holes in my work. That's who I think of when I'm repairing something. Is I want my competition to look at it and say, "Oh, wow. Yeah, it's pretty good." Not what a customer who is not a leather artisan looks. Right. So this particular bag, I'm sitting there going, "Wow, I've spent, X amount of hours on it, and I should have just replaced it altogether." Right. So not everything is salvageable. Not everything is fixable. Sometimes leather just has to get replaced altogether.
Right. That's true. But that's failures, that's how you learn. And and I can definitely second that the tools and the chemicals, it's a huge world. There will be a lot of failure, or not failure, but learning, trying to see different compounds, different brands, chemicals working for your specific need, your style. Uh, and I think you will never complete whatever's out there to test it. Once you find something that works for you, you will go for it, like the edge paints, the glues, and everything. Um, Once we're talking about those, like 10 things you need to get started in leather crafting, like absolutely best first investment to get you started, what would you say? The list of 10 things.
Well, I have them all out and I have a little list. So let me go through it so that I don't forget. So one of the things I recommend, so when people sign up to take my classes, they're all eager to start buying this and buying that. And I say, yeah, whatever you do, don't buy anything. Because one, part of the class cost is I'm sending you a kit, okay, specific for class. And a lot of these leather kits that you can purchase online, you'll use like one item in the kit. So I tell people, don't buy these leather kits. First, identify what it is you want to make, because there's probably a tool to use for that kit. But here are your top 10 basic, if you want to create your own kit, these are the things that you cannot avoid and you should have if you want to get into leather crafting. So besides your leather. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a given, yeah, right? So the first thing is a rubber mallet. So a heavy one is good. This was gifted to me.
That's a rawhide, right?
Actually, it's pretty cool.
That's
yeah, isn't that
that's
cool?
a rawhide. Basically, I don't know if some people may not know it, but the outside, it's a rolled rawhide dried out. It just makes a hammer.
Yeah, and it's sentimental because it was gifted to me, and like I said, I can't even believe what I was using before, but this is my rubber mallet. You can get one at a hardware store, not this, but just a regular rubber mallet. The heavier the better, so the mallet is doing the work as opposed to your wrist, mm-hmm, and your elbow. So you want the tool to be doing most, yeah, of the work. So the heavier this is, the more easy it's going to be to punch your holes. So that's number one. Number two is a leather punching pad. So this is a leather punching pad. First and only I ever bought. This thing is like 6 years old. You need this. A granite piece is not a substitute for this, because when you are punching your pricking iron, you need something that absorbs the shock. And just having a piece of granite, for example, that you think is going to protect your countertops is not appropriate, because you can't have two hard surfaces.
Yeah.
That shock has to get absorbed somewhere. So if you think you're going to save $10 and be creative and resourceful and just use, let's say, a granite piece left over from getting countertops done, you're going to crash your tools.
Yeah. And
so
the good ones are expensive, those chisels, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, number two is your pad, your punching pad. This doesn't have to be huge, huge, huge because you only need one big enough to cover the area that you're punching. Yeah. So, okay, that's number two. Okay, needle, thread, and thimble. I kind of made these in one. So your needle, your thread, and a thimble. So a thimble, I tell people whatever finger hurts or fingers hurt the most, that's what you cover with. You know, so for me and my style, stitching is kind of for me is like writing. So some people get calluses on different fingers. So I always have a thimble on my index finger. So this is a habit. I need it. What I say about thread is if you could break it by just doing this, it is too thin to use on leather. It will fray after a few stitches. Okay. So if you could rip it, it is not appropriate. So you should be able to pull as hard as you can and not rip it. So this is a brand I really like. It's Coates and Clark, and it's basically an upholstery thread that I get, from like a Joann's. I think Hobby Lobby, Michael's may have it too. But basically, you don't need this brand. If you could rip it with your hands, it is too thin. It will fray as you're going through. Needles. Okay, so how do you choose your needles? Depends. How big is your thread?
Right. And then how big is your pricking irons and holes? Yeah.
Correct. Right. So the question is, well, what thickness of thread do I use? Well, I don't know. How thick is the leather that you're consuming? So for instance, if I'm let's say making a horse saddle, that saddle is going to have many, many layers of leather, right? So let's say it's this much leather. Your holes are going to be farther apart because you're not going to be able to put a needle, so your holes have to be farther apart. And so the farther apart your holes, the thicker the thread is going to be. And so the thicker the thread is going to be, the bigger the needle is going to be. I advise people to not purchase leather specific sewing needles because when you go through your hole, if there's already thread in it, you're going to slice your hole. Those things are very, very sharp. You can go through the first time, but when you come back around and go through the second time, you will slice your thread because those things are like razor sharp. So, choose your needle based on your thread. Choose your thread based on the thickness of the leather. And then when I get into pricking irons, that's how you're going to choose your pricking
And then
irons.
probably having a master to learn from will help you a lot to determine all those stuff easier.
Yeah, again, yeah, definitely. So leather glue. I love the glue that I get from Hide House in Napa. It's no name glue. There's some people in Mexico that make it, and there's no. I put my glue actually. This is like a baker's tip, like people that make cookies and all that. So I like keeping mine in a bottle like this, and I put a baker's tip on it because a lot of the things, like if I'm gluing the edge, let's say a purse that is starting to come apart before I sew it back together, I like having a really thin tip. But then there's other things that, like an apparatus that holds glue in a little container in which the brush is in there, people could take out, just use that same brush. Glues I haven't found a glue at a regular craft store that is sufficient for leather crafting. So when it comes to glue, you need to really get it from a leather vendor. Yeah. I've tried them all, and you're not going to find a good glue at any of the craft stores. And please do not use crazy glue on leather. Crazy glue is not meant to be pliable and
Right.
flexible, and it will break and it'll destroy your leather, and it's just a bad idea. So number 5, edge coat. There's many different brands out there. I like applying a base edge coat, which I like using a clear edge coat. Um, let's see. So a lot of my students will ask me how many layers of edge coat do you use? Depends.
Right.
How many layers of leather am I using? So if my edge is very jagged, because let's say you're making something that's really thick, you're going to use more layers of edging. Also, I sand in between my layers. So similar to, like, let's say I'm refinishing a table that's made of wood. I'm not going to start with a table that has old paint on it that's flaking off. I'm going to sand everything down, make it smooth and flat, add, my layer
Right.
primer. So your primer, there's primer for edge painting. And then after it fully dries, lightly sand it down with a super, super fine sandpaper. And then, do I need another base coat, or can I add my color? So how many layers? Depends. How many layers of leather do you have? Because I love a perfect smooth edge with edge coat. So there's other people that don't use edge coat. They just like to do that buffing
Yeah,
and
and depends on the
burnishing.
leather. If
That's
you're working with veg tan, you can do burnishing. You can leave it raw. You can fold it in, no edge paint. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Folded in is notorious for Chanel. So, like,
yeah.
there's no
I
edging.
I I think
There.
that requires the most work in my opinion, like in the doing, and it's more durable. Again, like any kind of edge paint, I seem like it tends to flake at some point, dry, because eventually those are plastic paints and makes look old. If you turn it in, it takes time to do that very meticulous crafting, but I think it lasts the longest, the turned edges.
Yeah. It also takes the most work. Typically, the things that take the most work end up being
Yeah,
the highest quality.
exactly.
So yeah, so that's so edge coat, if you decide that's the look that you want, you need a knife, but again, just like I said, don't go out and spend the most amount of money on these tools. So you don't need a professional leather knife. You could use an X-Acto
Yeah,
knife. There's no such thing as too sharp. So, like, I'm in the business to have the sharpest blade always. I want my blade to be as sharp as possible. And here's a tip for everybody, that when you're using these disposable blades, you could actually resharpen these blades. So you don't once it dulls, even though they are a disposable blade, you can resharpen them by using, I stole this from my husband. It's just a knife
yeah.
sharpener that he uses to sharpen his kitchen knives. So you could sharpen your disposable blades on a knife sharpener. So, these could really add up as a consumable, but I get so much more use. It's not even the money. It's also the inconvenience of, I have to go to the store because my blades aren't sharp,
Right.
or I have to order. So when you have a knife sharpener, you can actually sharpen your disposable blades and make them last a lot longer. So an X-Acto knife is number 6 of things that you should have. A cutting mat.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
I have a few different ones of these, but just a nice size cutting mat if you're starting off. So it's not only to have the ability to a surface to cut to not damage your
Yeah.
countertops, but I also love the fact that you can line up everything and cut straight lines, because it has all of
Guides,
the
yeah.
markings of, yeah, your guides. So that's really good. Um, a ruler. So the longer the ruler, in my opinion, the
Yeah,
better.
and if
You know,
you can find the metal ones, I think it's really helps. It might be a little bit more pricey, but they last a long time. Because sometimes it's important to have sharp knives. Otherwise, you're gonna be very frustrated, maybe ruining your cuts too. And sharp knives cut into plastic rulers, and that doesn't last too long. So that was my learning early on.
Yeah, yeah, the metal ones are good. I also like the ability to have both metric systems because even, I mean, the world is beyond just the United
Yeah,
States that uses, inches. The rest of the world uses, centimeters and millimeters. So having both units of measurement is valuable. Um, the other thing that really helps too is using masking tape or painter's tape because you want to make sure your leather is held down when you go to cut. So I always, if I'm out of masking tape or painter's tape, like it's a need and it's a top 10 for me. Just make sure that when you're using this to tape down your leather before you cut it, you're cutting on the wrong side. Because if you have very beautiful leather that you're going to cut and you put tape, you may take off some
yeah,
of
yeah.
that
That's
finish.
yes.
Yeah. So this is, let's see, number 9 is masking tape. And then saving I was like, I feel like something is missing when I was making our list of top 10. I'm like, duh, you're pricking
Yeah,
irons. So saving the best for
right.
last. So pricking irons. So and let me get this out because I drew these out too. So this is just a matter of preference. But I personally love the diamond pricking iron. So different pricking irons will create a different stitch look. So the reason it's called a diamond pricking fork is because when you make the holes, it's in the shape of a diamond. But companies like Hermes have a much more slanted
French
stitch.
style, yeah.
You know, yeah, French style. And then there are some holes that are just straight up
Right.
circles. So there's different pricking forks, appropriately named because it looks like a fork. There's a number in the front, and the number, I know you know this, I'm just explaining it for people listening, starting off. So that number represents the distance between forks in millimeters. So it's so funny, when I was listening to like Peter Nitz on your podcast talk about like there's so few real authenticators. I've seen some people sit counting the stitches saying, oh, well, this is not an authentic XYZ product because it should have this number of stitches. Well, you don't have to sit and count 100 stitches across the board. If you just take a ruler and measure the length of the stitch in millimeters, that's what those holes represent. So you don't have to count stitches, but each hole is distance in millimeters. So this number 4 represents 4 millimeters from one fork to the next, to the next, to the next. So what pricking iron size should someone get? Well, it depends.
Yeah.
How thick is the piece that you're doing? So if I'm doing something like and I don't make saddles for horses, so, but I'm just using that as an example. It's a very, very thick piece of leather. You'd never use something that's so closely spaced apart because you need thicker thread. So the thicker the piece, the thicker the thread, the bigger your needle, and the more wide pricking iron forks that exist.
Right.
So something that's really thin, let's say like a watch band, a 2.7 millimeter is a common distance. You're also using really, really thin thread. But something like this, I didn't make this, but this is something I bought many, many years ago, they're using really thick thread, and those holes are very, you'd never make holes this big on something like a watch band. It would look awful.
Absolutely.
So the thickness of leather, so the cool thing, and here's where the art comes in, is you have a lot of room to control what you want your stitches to look like by the kind of pricking iron that you use and this distance that you want. So as much as you get a lot of guidance from a skilled master because of the number of what creates a master, the number of hours that they put into this skill set to deem them master level, but as much as you learn the basic techniques and learn about tools and resources, you also individually will have freedom to determine your style. You know, your favorite kinds of leathers, styles of stitching may be very, very different than the next person and the next person. So there's a lot of freedom, and that's where that art comes in into choosing the style of the end product that you inevitably end up making.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why having a person to learn from is gonna shorten the time and probably lower the budget you're gonna spend to get started. And this list is not really a large list to start with, and probably the most expensive item is the pricking irons, especially if you want to go fancy with it. You know, each one, so far the most pricey ones are, I think, KS, like Korean stuff, may run up to like 50, 60, or $100 each, like different forks. But outside of that, I think everything else is pretty, like affordable stuff.
Very,
Yeah, and
yeah, very reasonable.
you can find cheaper pricking irons to start with to try things on Amazon and all that. They're gonna be very soft metals. They're gonna bend very quickly. You gotta be very careful, but it will get you started.
Yeah, it'll do the job. It'll get you
Yeah,
started. No need to start with like the Ferraris of pricking
yeah.
irons if you're just starting.
So I think
And don't drop them. If you drop them, it's. I think this is my maybe my third set, but I have dropped the second ones of these. I love the 10
yeah,
prong, um, but it's like when I drop them, it's always the middle one that ends up breaking off, and never like the
yeah,
end. So
yeah. It's
usually have to get replaced.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really a quick hobby to start with if you want to start dabbling with leather. So this was really cool knowledge you shared so far in the journey. Is there anything else you want to add to starting people to this leather crafting journey?
Just like everything else, you could spend hours and hours researching. Just start.
Yeah,
Um, and don't don't come out of the gate thinking you're going to make a duffel bag. That is not a beginner type of thing. Start something straight lines, a square, something very simple, because you want to work towards understanding how to even punch, or hammer in a straight line. So if you go from 0 to 100 without allowing yourself to crawl, to walk, to then jog, to then run, to then race, you're going to get very discouraged, and your stuff's not going to look very good. And also, I tell my students too, if you're going to make garbage, don't be telling people that I was your instructor. Because I take a lot of pride in work, and nothing replaces practice. So start small. After you make a bookmark, you may want to make a coaster, for your glass. You may then want to make, simple things that are in square patterns. Don't come out and say, all right, I made a bookmark. Now I'm going to make a backpack,
right.
because nothing replaces practice and slowly growing. So, yeah, so take your time. It's very fulfilling, totally enjoyable, and a great way to take out your anger when you're just,
Yeah.
so very, very therapeutic. A lot of my students say that too. I find the art of leather crafting to be very therapeutic.
I 100% agree with it. So I always ask the last question. Um, you mentioned your repair services and you have the classes. You still do both, right?
Yeah, I've gotten away from classes. I don't want to promote myself as like classes at
Mhm.
all, because it just takes so much time to make the kits. It wasn't something I was doing for the money. I basically, what I was charging just covered the cost. It just takes a lot of time, and I'm trying to be better at saying no to
Mhm.
everything. So I really don't want to do a lot of. There's plenty of people out there that do teach,
Yeah,
so go
they're
find them. Go to Switzerland, go find Peter. Have
he's
Peter
also
teach.
not he's moving away from classes too. I think he accepted me just because we talked a long time ago and he's like, "Oh, that would be great to meet." but I don't think he's gonna continue with in-person classes as well. He has an online tutorial in his website. I think the absolutely best material I've seen so far. It's definitely like you can buy it in modules and per class kind of things, but it was absolutely helpful. But there is a lot more people definitely teaching. So if that's not
Yeah.
something you're continuously doing, it's understandable. That's why I wanted to ask if you still do it. So where people find you for the services you offer, which is at this point repair, I understand. And if there's anything else you do for people, and how do they find and reach out to you?
Yeah, so my Instagram is the best way to find my portfolio of seeing the things that I've done. So my capabilities, Marianne Amore 13. So Marianne Amore number
We will put
13.
that we will put that on the screen to make it easy for people. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. The other thing that I do is electroplating. So that was an interesting thing that I decided to invest in the machine. So electroplating. So a lot of this hardware is metal, sometimes chrome, nickel, various different metals that's used,
Zama.
sometimes pot
Yeah.
metal. Yeah, and so these are so this gold is electroplated in like a 24 karat gold. Um, so in order to so over time, things that are gold plated, just with the normal wear and tear, it's going to rub off, and so you'll see the underneath metal because of that. So I wanted to invest in the equipment and learn how to electroplate because nobody else was doing that at the time that I bought my equipment. So there's something to be said for sending someone back their beautiful luxury bag that looks brand new, and then their hardware is tarnished or silver and all that. So that's why I decided to get into electroplating. So that's something that I do offer. Not every bag needs it, but sometimes these really, like a 30-year-old bag comes in and it needs more than just polishing, because you can't polish back 24 karat gold that's
Right.
removed. So that is a whole art and craft in itself.
Sounds like it.
And so that's been a nice, yeah, that's been a nice compliment to my business.
Okay, that's
So
great. So, I think a lot of people who has some vintage pieces that would like to get reconditioned, repaired, definitely will reach out to you from the Instagram channel. Is there anything else you want to add to this nice conversation?
I think we covered just about
Yeah,
everything.
awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for spending the time with us today. Hopefully, it was helpful to people who might consider getting into leathercraft and to make their journey a little bit easier to start with. Definitely appreciate you sharing your experience here.
Awesome. Anytime.
All
Thank
right.
you, Tanner. And thank you for everything you do for the leather community.
My
So
pleasure.
it's been fun watching you grow and all the things that you do. So I love
My
it.
pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.